The better I get to know men, the more I find myself loving dogs. Charles de Gaulle. The story of the dog is one of both wolf and man. How two apex predators, whose ranges spanned across much of the world and oftentimes clashed with each other, would, at various moments, set aside their differences and triumph over the harshest of elements Mother Nature had to offer, as well as all the other beasts that roamed the wilds. As Homo sapiens pushed out of what is now sub-Saharan Africa and into North Africa and Eurasia, they had to adapt to an unfamiliar set of terrains, and came into contact with another creature at the top of the food chain, the Pleistocene wolf, the closest ancestor to the modern-day gray wolf, that looks almost identical to gray wolves of today, but have slightly different features when it came to their teeth and tongues. The Pleistocene wolves are now extinct today. Other closest living relatives are the gray wolves, which is why some people say that dogs were domesticated from the gray wolf, which is quasi-true. I actually made that mistake in one of my previous videos. These proto-gray wolves were remarkably adapted to the Pleistocene epoch, which in layman's terms refers to the last ice age. The range was gigantic, stretching across much of what is now Europe, North America, and North Africa. They also were in much of the Middle East and Central and East Europe. And like humans, after them, they would cross a land bridge between Siberia and Alaska to conquer much of the Americas. Well suited for this cold, harsh environment, their ability to both hunt and scavenge for food made them a formidable challenger for a species of African bipedal apes, which lacked a keen sense of smell, sharp teeth, or long nails, but had the advantage over all the other beasts in one sense: their minds. The human ability to learn new skills and pass off those new skills to generations would improve those new skills in turn made this the greatest apex species the Earth had ever seen. Humans at this point had already mastered wood and stone tools, along with harnessing the power of fire. These innovations, paired with their intellect and dexterity, would make them more powerful than any of the woolly mammoths or saber-toothed cats. Now, there were some similarities between humans and wolves. In sharp contrast to so many other beasts, they would be a very practical team up. Both were social animals. Both are hunters, which nonetheless did eat plant matter on occasion. Yes, contrary to popular belief, wolves do eat berries and tubers and other vegetation occasionally. After all, wolves are scavengers, and they are not strictly carnivorous like most cat species are. Humans, by and large, being hunter-gatherers at the time, probably got most of their food from plants. However, the meat they ate provided them with the dense calories, probably which played a key role in fueling their powerful brains. Humans at the time were not settled down in permanent villages, but moved from place to place after the herds of game, also looking for sources of fresh water or fresh fruit. At first, interactions between these two alpha species was probably based off of fear, or outright aggression. Wolf killed man, and man killed wolf. After all, they were competing over the same territory and game. This most likely led to a series of violent clashes. Sure, they could eat each other, but perhaps there was a better way to solve the conflict. Two ways, in fact. The first was that humans would clash with wolves and kill the adults for food, competition, or self-defense, as even the sharpest of teeth cannot cut through fire or stone. Perhaps early man, after killing the hostile adult wolves, saw the pups, innocent, harmless, cute pups, with disproportionately large pupils compared to their eyes, and disproportionately large eyes compared to their heads, and disproportionately large heads compared to their bodies. They somewhat resemble cute human babies. These proportional features induce oxytocin, the affection hormone, that in reductionist terms drives our love for our children and our partners. Both humans and dogs to this day release oxytocin when spending time with each other. Sure, this would result in spending resources on pups, but It would also be mitigated if these pups could grow up to serve some sort of utility. Early humans may have decided on occasions to raise these pups as their own, through the power of cuteness. Another explanation, which is not mutually exclusive, but I believe is the more important one, is that there were more docile wolves entering human encampments. These wolves were probably not interested in hunting humans, but more interested in scavenging for food scraps that humans left over. These wolves were probably on their own, lone wolves if you could call them that, looking for a pack, and they were less fearful and less aggressive. Wolves in packs and human bands have fairly similar social structures. This would make them fairly easy to merge together. A lone wolf could simply bond with a human society on a small scale. After all, more afraid wolves would not enter human camps looking for food in the first place, and the ones that would attack humans would have been killed. This is not to say that these curious, docile wolves were like Pomeranians, but rather that they would stick around humans, help them hunt, sniff out prey, and guard camps from other beasts as well as other humans. This mostly occurred in Siberia, as Siberia was in Eurasia, close to the Americas, which also had dogs. However, there are some theories that point out a separate set of domestication events. This may explain why, despite the fact that most breeds trace their origin back to the Old World, there are some New World breeds like the Alaskan Malamute and the Mexican Chihuahua. It is also the reason why Native Americans and people of the Old World both had domesticated dogs, whereas Native Americans, for example, didn't have cattle, chickens, or pigs. The massive range of domestication led to the vast majority of dog types today, from the aforementioned tiny Chihuahua to the Great Dane. These wolves, next to humans, would breed over the course of generations. Humans would kill aggressive wolves and continue to breed docile wolves, resulting in animals with a keen sense of smell, as well as the speed and bite force of a wolf, but would be friendly and not bite your face off, hence the dog. They combined the might of the mind, eyesight, and dexterity of Homo sapiens with the keen sense of smell, speed, and bite force of the dog. This made us a dynamic, formidable duo. Notice how I said Homo sapiens, not humans. This is because there were other species of humans, such as the Neanderthals, who did not domesticate the dog. And this is part of the reason why, among others, they eventually went out extinct. This eventually led to Homo sapiens outcompeting other types of humans. Eventually, various human societies switched from hunting and gathering to settling down permanently in farming. Dogs adapted to this as well, with humans living off of starchy grain rather than woolly rhino meat. Their diets were composed of wheat, barley, rice, corn, and other starchy foods depending on the geographic location. This is why dogs today can eat dry food like kibble, which usually has cornstarch, wheat flour, or other grain-based ingredients, along with meat, while, say, a wild animal like the dingo from Australia cannot digest starches. Other physiological changes began to emerge, like having shorter snouts and floppy ears that came alongside decreased aggression. We've seen this in other animals such as goats and pigs, which have shorter snouts and less hair and floppier ears alongside less aggression. With agriculture, humans settled down and developed the concept of private property rather than communal sharing belongings in the tribe. This led to personal guard dogs, which could be bred for increased aggression towards outsiders, but also protection for insiders with pointed ears capable of detecting the slightest sounds. Some eventually picked up a nomadic lifestyle after domesticating a set of animals such as goats and sheep, along with, a little later, cattle and camels. Dogs with shorter legs and nippier personalities can be used for herding a flock and protecting them from their still wild counterparts, wolves. By picking man over wolf, the dog had clearly became man's best friend. With agriculture, particularly on settled farms, a surplus of crops began to emerge, which allowed some humans to spend their time working on other pursuits other than producing food. Religious figures, scribes, craftsmen, smiths, and other jobs began to emerge as human jobs diversified. And with their jobs diversifying, so did these four little companion creatures. Some dogs were bred to have longer snouts in order to gain a more refined sense of smell. These would be ancestors of the hounds, used for tracking wolves like beagles or finding clues for criminals like bloodhounds. Others would be bred to chase after fast prey with their thin bodies and long legs. One of the oldest breeds would come from Arabia, known as the Saluki, which is one of the oldest breeds on the planet, which hunted alongside Bedouins and still does to this day. The Saluki is actually the only dog mentioned in the Quran. Greyhounds and Whippets would follow through and be used for racing. Racing, after all, is mostly used for recreation and gambling. Other dogs were more controversially used for fighting, most notably the pit bull. Unlike earlier dog breeds that were bred to be more docile, these were bred to be more aggressive. In some jurisdictions, they're actually banned, such as Ontario, Canada. Other dogs would be bred to lead horses and their carts, such as the Dalmatian. Others would be used to pull sleighs across the tundra, like one of the oldest breeds, the Siberian Husky. Whether it was a Saluki in the Arabian desert or a Husky in the Siberian tundra, the adaptability of these creatures and their ability to be utilized by humans was simply remarkable. By the 1800s, during Britain's Victorian era, these breeds were standardized into kennel clubs, as administration swept into nearly every aspect of human existence, as well as breakthroughs in evolution and genetics. This gave humans the ability to seek out certain traits in a more hands-on approach that is more scientifically accurate than the artificial selection of the past. However, some breeds, like the Chow Chow, were bred in China for food, most controversially. Dog meat has been taboo in the West, and in many other cultures, usually only eaten under extreme circumstances such as starvation when a city is under siege. However, there is some limited acceptability for eating dogs in countries like China, Vietnam, and the Koreas. Some say that it doesn't make any sense to prohibit the consumption of dogs, as after all, most of us do eat pigs, chicken, cattle, and sheep. While others argue that the special bond between humans and dogs should prohibit the consumption of dogs. Granted, dog consumption in East Asia is fairly exaggerated, and most Koreans and Chinese people have never eaten dogs before. With the establishment of the middle class in countries like South Korea and an emerging middle class in China, this has led more people to owning dogs simply for companionship, and as a result, consumption of dog meat is likely to continue to decline. And this brings us to the main use of dogs today: friendship. While dogs were primarily bred for utility, humans and dogs did bond with each other, and for the most part, the use of companionship for dogs was usually something relegated to those in positions of power, with a lot of resources and authority. But with the expanding middle class, this changed. After all, dogs in many ways make the perfect pet. They're smart and social enough to form loving bonds, learn tricks, perform tasks, and obey orders, but dumb enough to not question human authority or engage in complex long-term planning. Dogs, aside from minor instincts like digging bones to use in the future, tend to just live in the moment and lack the critical thinking skills to ponder and question authority, the rules, or even death. This is part of the reason why they're so happy. Compare this to monkeys, which are far smarter but make terrible pets. Since monkeys are smart enough to have their own agenda and question the rules you set for them. However, dogs were not always viewed in such a positive light. If you've ever watched a movie set in the Middle Ages, or played a video game set in the Middle Ages, or some sort of fantasy movie or novel or whatever it is, you may have heard characters call their enemies dogs. This may sound unusual for us today. However, it's worth noting that the reason why many of us see dogs as overwhelmingly positive is by and large a more recent phenomenon, as many people in the past saw dogs as dangerous, lowly creatures. This most likely has to do with the threat of rabies. While dogs are very useful for humans, a bite from a rabid dog could be a death sentence. For example, in the Islamic tradition, dogs were considered unclean, and the Prophet Muhammad personally disliked dogs, which in part explains why the Muslim world has far lower rates of dog ownership than other parts of the planet. However, this is changing, partially due to modern medicine. With the advent of the aforementioned rabies vaccine by Louis Pasteur and widespread vaccination of canines in the developed world, the threat of rabies has been far less common. With the threat of rabies minimized, more and more people have brought dogs into their homes without the fear of a life-threatening disease. Dogs are now associated more with loyalty and love than rabies and death. for the 20th century and the rise of a large middle class in the developed world led to many more dogs, not necessarily for herding sheep or guarding their homes, but for friendship. This trend would continue into the 21st century in emerging economies. By the Great Recession, companion dogs eventually became less of a symbol of the middle class and upper class wealth, but rather a giffen good. A giffen good is a good or service that increases in demand due to struggling economies, kind of like mac and cheese or ramen noodles, which makes sense given the 2008 recession. The reason being is that in the modern world, we've created a crisis of affordability. Zoomers and millennials have started to delay having families and having kids, but they still want someone to nurture. With the rise of urbanization and the high cost of living, dogs have become, at the very least, a temporary replacement for children among working class professionals and among white collar professionals. This is a concept known as pet parenting, which has come along with some cringe, but nonetheless, I kinda like it. And with that, my viewers, this is the end of the tale of Wolf and Man so far, but the story shall continue for centuries, if not millennia, to come. A story of the dog, a synthesis between two enemies that produced best friends. And with that being said, I'd like to dedicate this video to my best friend, Lupa.